The U.S. federal government is continuing to thumb its nose at concerned citizens over mass migration of illegal aliens into the country. Despite 5 million people swarming over the border in just the past 2 years alone, our current regime continues to do everything in its power to not enforce our laws, our border laws, and at the same time is fighting tooth and nail to stop states doing anything about it themselves. Let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about here. In the most recent case, we have the U.S. Department of Justice, or the DOJ. They have now filed yet another lawsuit, this time against the state of Oklahoma, challenging the constitutionality of House Bill 4156. This is a new state law that imposes criminal penalties on illegals residing within Oklahoma without legal immigration status. This legislation, which was signed by Governor Kevin Stitt just a few weeks ago, back on April 30th, created a new crime called impermissible occupation. The law makes it a misdemeanor for a first offense, which is punishable by up to a year in jail and a $500 fine. Subsequent offenses are classified as felonies, carrying penalties for up to 2 years in prison and a $1,000 fine. Those who break the law, by the way, are then required to leave the state within 72 hours of their release from custody, or else they will face additional prosecution. Now, naturally, our Department of Justice didn't want this to happen. After all, if more states get involved, it might hamper their efforts to flood the country with untold millions of non-citizens. Shocking, I know. The DOJ is arguing that Oklahoma's law is preempted by federal law and violates the U.S. Constitution. The federal government is maintaining here that immigration enforcement is a federal responsibility, even though they are refusing to do it themselves, and are once again arguing that states cannot enact laws that interfere with federal immigration policies. Now, as I alluded to earlier, the DOJ isn't just fighting Oklahoma. They have also tied up states like Texas and Iowa within the court system over their state-level immigration laws. Now, to expand on this story, I'm going to pull up an article. This is from the Politics Brief. This is titled, Red State, or the DOJ sues Red State over law that would put illegal aliens in prison. They write, the DOJ sued Oklahoma to invalidate new legislation that makes remaining in the state without lawful immigration status a crime. The action, filed in Oklahoma City's federal court, is part of the DOJ's larger attempt to challenge similar immigration legislation in Texas and in Iowa. The new legislation is part of a growing trend in Republican-controlled states to enforce immigration laws on their own. Once again, because the federal government is doing nothing about the problem. Anyway, they go on to write that according to a statement from U.S. Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General Brian Boynton, well, that's a name, the government action seeks to protect constitutional principles and the immigration system established by Congress. Boynton said that Oklahoma cannot disregard the U.S. Constitution and settled Supreme Court precedent. We have brought this action to ensure that Oklahoma adheres to the Constitution and the framework adopted by Congress for regulation of immigration. Again, what complete and utter nonsense. Deputy Assistant Attorney General Brian Boynton, well, he's just been a mouthpiece for a government that is hell-bent on subverting the will of its people. The federal government is refusing to stop this invasion and is seemingly aiding the infestation themselves of this mass migration by shuttling illegals all over the country by the tens of thousands. Worse still, just last year, the U.S. border encountered 169 people crossing into the country who were currently on the U.S. terror watch list. And that, by the way, is only the ones that we know about. The U.S. federal government is willfully disregarding the safety of its citizens. They are refusing to stop this incredibly, overwhelmingly large flow of humans into this country. This is unsustainable. But the federal government doesn't want to do anything about it. Anyway, the article goes on to write that Republican Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt defended the law, arguing it was essential due to the Biden administration's inadequate border security measures. Stitt said this. He said, not only that, but they stand in the way of states trying to protect their citizens. Oklahoma Attorney General Gunter Drummond has also contested the Justice Department's preemption allegations, claiming the state's power to enact legislation to address public problems within its borders. Drummond said Oklahoma is exercising its concurrent and complementary power as a sovereign state to address an ongoing public crisis within its borders through appropriate legislation. Put more bluntly, Oklahoma is cleaning up the Biden administration's mess through entirely legal means in its own backyard, and will resolutely continue to do so by supplementing federal prohibitions with robust state penalties. Now, what Drummond is referring to is something called the Invasion Clause. You see, the federal government is constitutionally obligated to protect states here in the U.S. against invasion under Article 4, Section 4, which is known as the Guarantee Clause. If the federal government fails to fulfill this duty, states may argue that they have the right to defend themselves. Now, a fly in the ointment to this, though, is the courts have long since protected the federal government's actions on this matter in the past. You see, historically, the courts have been reluctant to classify illegal immigration as an invasion under the constitutional definition, because of course they don't want to. They would force the federal government's hand to fix the problem. For instance, federal courts have rejected claims that these surges in illegal immigration constitute an invasion, emphasizing that such matters often involve non-judicial policy decisions. However, some legal scholars and state officials are arguing that the current situation at the southern border, involving organized criminal activities by cartels and gangs, could meet the criteria for invasion, thus justifying state action under the State Self-Defense Clause, not to mention the millions and millions of people just flooding the zone. Now, at some point, when are we going to start classifying the tens of millions of people in this U.S. as an invasion? You have over 22 million people who have crossed into the U.S. illegally. They live here now. 22 million. The last 2 years was more people coming across the border than were born in the U.S. You might just be looking at an invasion here. To give you an idea of just how bad things really are at the U.S. border, let's use Texas as an example here. They've obviously been leading the way in trying to fight to stop this invasion, and have since enacted a coordinated attack on the problem with something called Operation Lone Star, which they enacted back in March of 2021. Governor Greg Abbott created a multi-agency effort which involved the Texas National Guard and the Texas Department of Public Safety, or the DPS. Since 2021, they have apprehended 506,000 illegal immigrants, and they have conducted more than 41,000 criminal arrests with over 36,000 felony charges. Texas law enforcement have also seized over 471 million lethal doses of fentanyl during this mission. The stats here are ridiculous. They're absurd. They're astounding. And when you consider that this is just one state, you begin to understand just how incredibly, staggeringly huge this issue really is. Our federal government and many politicians from both parties within have for decades gaslit their citizens about the enormity of this problem. This is very similar, by the way, to our counterparts across the pond in the European Union. Our leaders seem hell-bent on creating this chaos. The only real question that I have left is this, is why? And what could they possibly benefit from all of this chaos?